This is Platemark. My name is Ann Shafer, and if you are a regular listener, you will know that this is Platemark and that we are moving on to part 2 of my conversation with Phil Sanders. We stopped kind of in the middle of talking about a bunch of things, so you're just going to get thrown back into the deep end, and I hope you enjoy it. Buckle up, and here we go.
And then, as you say, especially like with your fair, like you get to talk to people. And everybody loves it. It's like when I do the tours for the fair, my favorite part is actually just doing the setup for the person who's the publisher, who's in the booth, right? So I give some background. I'm like, this is a printer publisher, or this is a straight publisher, or this, I give a little bit of background and then I kind of set that person up. And it's just like, they get crazy happy. They're talking about the things that they've made with artists. They love all this work. They've been intimately involved with it. And it's that enthusiasm that comes through. And so I feel like, whatever we can do in this high-paced part of the commerce end of the world to get people to real human interaction, we've done a great service. And that's a big part of your job. There's this ceramic artist here in North Carolina where I'm at outside. She's up there in the Penland area, Cynthia Bringle. And if Penland people out there will know exactly who I'm talking about. One of the best things I ever heard her say was, your first job as an artist is not to make your work, but is to educate your audience about your work.
Oh, yeah.
She's like, if you don't teach them, they don't understand why it's so important. She's like, you're a teacher first. You have to be able to translate your love. She goes, you don't have to be profound. You don't have to have the best thing a critic could say. She goes, because that's not you. You're an artist. She goes, but you just need to translate your love, your passion, and kind of the nonverbal reasons that this is important, that gut feeling. So as a publisher and someone who sells work, my favorite thing to hear someone say when I'm talking to them about a work is they go, I don't know why I love it, I just do. Or it speaks to me. I was like, job done. And it's because, it's a visual language. Like my wife's work, it has to speak to you first visually before anything else is going to matter, right? Because it's a visual language. It's visual. And so if it's doing that, makes people speechless, you don't have to say much else, right? You just have to help that person have that experience and then carry through it, help them value it, right? Like what you're doing with your podcast. It's really helping people slow down and have a primary experience with a primary practitioner, whether it be a curator or an artist or a printer. I think that's what's so great about what you're doing is that you're creating those primary experiences. And a lot of what comes across in your interviews is the nonverbal. It's just that person's passion for something. It's your passion for things, right? And that in and of itself is enough to make people want to investigate further, right? Because this person's crazy excited. I should think about this, think about the best TED Talks you've ever seen. It's like, you may know nothing about astrophysics, but after that, you're going to be curious because that person was just like, this is amazing.
Right.
And you can see how parts of that affect you. Right. And I think it's that exchange. Prints have often facilitated that human exchange, right? It's that thing you can hold, you can look at it with someone else. Someone says, did you see that? And you're like, no, I didn't notice that ever. I've been looking at this print for 20 years and there's this thing over here that the artist put in and now I see it. One of my favorite things is when people don't know about the people and the bushes and Rembrandt's Three Trees.
The Three Trees, yeah.
It's like my favorite, that was one cheeky man. He was always doing, his best buddy, Bayhem, doing all kinds of, crazy things too, and so you start to get those personalities of people that come through in their work and you get to feel closer to it. And what it's doing is helping you, live your life more fully. And I talk about this a lot, especially with collectors, is that, one of the main roles of the arts goes back to the key element that has allowed humanity to survive, people as a species, which is our adaptability. So it's not food, water, and shelter. It's our ability to find food, water, and shelter, to adapt. Because when you look at us, we have very little protection. Like, I don't have claws. All my vital organs are just fully exposed because I'm standing upright. It's like, what do I have? I have an ability to adapt to changing situations. That's our most important skill as a species. And what helps us maintain our creativity is curiosity. And that's what helps us maintain our adaptability. And so what are the arts? Seeing the world through someone else's eyes, becoming creative, becoming curious as to why someone did this. It's that investigative, it's that natural extension. So the more someone learns to exercise the creative and curiosity side of their brain, the more adaptable they become, the more connected they become to their own lives and the lives around them. And it's super important. It's why we've survived, right? And so when you think about making a print and you get someone in a studio and you show them the 15 layers that had to be drawn in black to then make this crazy color thing, that creativity, curiosity thing kicks into high gear. And that's why anytime you can have someone press side in a print shop, they become a lifelong lover of prints.
Oh, yes, for sure.
My best sales tool forever has always been the printing demonstration. You can take someone who knows nothing. They can maybe be a shipping magnate, a big time attorney, or a doctor. They're like masters of their field, know nothing about art. 15 minutes later of being press side, they're a super fan of prints forever.
Yeah.
So it's really about how we create those, Cynthia Bringle, how we educate, And so, forums like yours is a great baseline educator because your guests are excited and that gets people interested. And then people are like, well, maybe I should go think about that, or I should go look at this thing that's happening.
Right. Yeah, I have a collector who actually is near you in Asheville, Bob Benitez, and he sends me a report after every episode, which is so sweet, and I love hearing from him because sometimes he's like, I think you should maybe not do that one thing, whatever it was. Like, I blipped out some swear words in one episode one time because there were so many, and he's like, I would rather hear you swear, thank you. It was super sweet, but he does often say, boy, I didn't know anything about that artist and I went down a rabbit hole and it's so cool and I'm not collecting anymore, but I'm acquiring one for the museum in my town.
Yeah.
Like that. What could be better?
And Bob's great. I've met him and he's acquired some stuff, helping out the Asheville Art Museum. And I think, for patrons of the arts, and I'm happy to call Bob Benitez a patron of the arts, they understand that. So when I work with collectors, there's a thing I try to have happen, which is when you convert from being a collector to a patron, right? And you don't have to have a lot of money to make that conversion. It's really a mindset. So it's like buying for me, like to hold, to collect, right? And when you think about collecting, that's like a gathering, it's mine, versus patronage is support. So it's not buying just because you like it, but it's buying to preserve it, to pass it on. It's buying to ensure that artist gets to keep making their work. There was an amazing exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art a number of years ago. It was the Steins collection, Leo and Gertrude Stein. And one of my favorite wall cards of all time was next to a Picasso blue period painting. And it was of, I think it's the peasant woman or the beggar. And it's of a emaciated homeless woman. And the card, to paraphrase the card, it stated how Gertrude Stein hated this painting, hated all these blue period paintings. She was wondering when he was going to stop doing pictures of beggars and poor people, but she bought it anyway. And the reason she bought it was because she was supporting the mind and the person and where he would go, not what he was doing right now. So she's like, I don't even like this, but I'm going to buy it because I need to keep him making work. He needs to eat. That's patronage, to where you're helping to support something to continue. Regardless if you understand it or if you love it, it's because you have faith in it. So when collectors switch over to being patrons, it's when they take that love and that knowledge that they've acquired and recognize that their support isn't just for them. It's so that other people can have access to. And I think it's a shift that has to occur for someone to make that jump. And the more people who do that, the more artists will be supported, and print shops and publishers will be supported, because they're not just buying for their walls. They're buying for museum drawers. They're buying to keep that print shop going because they appreciate what they do. And they're finding other ways to like deal with the volume of stuff. But, so I go back, prints are flat generally. They're easier to store. I mean, we all make crazy stuff. For me, the collectors who make that jump to patronage, moving forward, also can be the people to help in those nonprofit collaborative entities. That's that person who can put their support in, because maybe they don't need any more art for their house, but it doesn't mean they don't need more art in their lives. And it doesn't mean that they don't need to participate. So there's ways, and it's about helping people find those ways. And so for young people, if you're thinking about getting into this field, it's not easy, but it's doable. If it's who you are and it's what you want to do, you just got to be really open to learning as much about the business as possible, as quickly as possible, making as many connections to people as far and wide as possible. And at the end of the day, being dedicated to the art first that happens to be a print. And I think I can't stress that enough, because what we're making is a contribution to culture. That's what we're doing. If you're making contemporary work, that's what you're doing, right? It's not always about the money. I tell collectors, I said, if you buy the work of artists who are no longer living, that's a financial investment and an affirmation of the cultural contribution it has already made, right? It's saying, we believe this still has import and it's still making its contribution. You buy the work of a living artist, you're supporting the growth of culture. It's not a financial investment, it's an investment in culture. It may turn out to be financial later, but that shouldn't be your first reason for doing it. If it's your first reason for doing it, buy old masters or something.
Right.
Right. You know, just like, because it's essentially like buying gold. You know, like, oh, I'll buy that Rembrandt that so and so and so and so has had. We'll just trade it back and forth, right? Your reaction's the same as mine. So mostly this is audio. So, but you know, I mean, but at the same time, I think once you help a collector understand that, it really frees them up to support wider. In a print shop environment, a collector can get to know the artist. Like, artists are here, they're working with us over an extended period of time. Make a phone call. Come have lunch with us, you know, come have dinner or drinks with us, you know. I've never, ever, ever heard an artist or a printer turn down a really great dinner invitation. You've been busting your ass all day. And someone says, how about I take you and the artist out to dinner? We're all like,
yes.
Sounds great. And we're always usually like, we'll start at 8 p.m. for dinner because we got to work. And so, you know, there's lots of ways. So there's so many collectors that have developed these really great relationships with artists because they were able to meet them in a print shop. It's an accessible environment. I think that's what's key too. So for young people, you need to get to know people, take a road trip, go visit a printer or a print shop that you're interested in. They may or may not be able to help you, but you're going to learn something in that time. And then it gets back to, it's someone who knows you, right? And so, because if somebody calls me up and says, hey, Phil, do you know anybody? I need to hire someone for this project. I start to have a list of people versus like, no, I don't got anybody right now. You know, so you got to find a way to put yourself out there and be involved and recognize if you're young, your skill set is enough to get you in the door, but not necessarily enough to make you useful, you know. And I know that from personal experience. Like my first years, I was enthusiastic and not useful. So, you know, I so wanted to be useful, but it takes time before you can handle paper without screwing it up. Before anyone's going to be willing to let you like put a roller to a plate or an inking card to something of value, you know, because it's like, there's a risk for that side. And I think it's important to recognize that. I know it was hard for me and I was just like, but I can do it. And people are like, maybe, you know, you're 19 and you know, you have more energy than brains. So, you know, it's just how it goes in it, you know, and you hope that over time you can maintain your energy and increase your brains. But generally how the brains are increased is by having more brains available, more people.
Right.
And, you know, so, you know, it's like for me, that's why I'm really grateful right now that I have such a good printer working with me and Lindsay Sigmund, because she's really been a great help and she's someone who's really interested and active and is excited. And that's you need excitement in a print shop. You need that energy because that's what maintains the romance.
That's right. How did you find Lindsay?
University of North Carolina, Asheville, UNCA. Has a really great printmaking instructor by the name of Robert Dunning. He's a super kind person, very enthusiastic. And, you know, so when I first moved here, I did some demos and some talks for students and stuff. And Lindsay was just getting ready to finish school then. And so we kind of met a little bit and I did some he would text me like technical questions for projects she was working on and stuff. And so there was I get this from people all the time.
Of course.
Over the place. like, I'm having this weird problem.
Ask
I'm
Phil.
like, all right, everybody fix it. Or I get emails like, I mean, you get, it comes. So that was like kind of our first meeting, but it was like brief. And she ends up graduating. She went to Tamron. I was needing someone, and she was just moving back around the holiday time. And it took a few months for her. So I reached out to her instructor again. I was like, hey, I heard that, Lindsay was moving back to town. Did she move back to town? Can you put us in touch with them and see if something can work out? And, it's like, as a printer, you kind of know if someone's going to work in less than 5 minutes.
Oh,
Or you at least know where they're going to be, right? It's like where they're going to be coming in at, what you can trust them for. Like, you can tell within 5 minutes. These are really small environments. You can tell by the way someone walks in the door, how they walk around equipment, how, like, you can tell their comfort level, right? And if they have a high level of comfort, and this relates to the music world that they refer to as comfort with the instrument. Doesn't mean you're good at it. It just means that you're no longer intimidated by the instrument itself. So like if you're learning the violin or learning the piano and there's a hesitance, because you're still learning how it feels, right? Or playing the guitar, you're still like, you're building up callus, like you don't have it. So if you have that basic comfort, that's immediately discernible. And then that means you can start at a different place with someone. And then it's like over the rest of the time is figuring out exactly where they're at and what you need to do with training or levels of responsibility. But it was like, yeah, within 5 minutes. Like you can tell, because I've been doing this a long time. I've trained a lot of printers over the years. So you can really, really tell. And so for young people, it's important to be honest with yourself where you're at and what you want, because that comes through. Right. So, I mean, these are no bullshit environments. Right? I mean, it's like it works or it doesn't. It's like
right.
It's pretty binary environment.
Right.
It's like on, off. It's like, and I think how many of our printmaking processes are binary? Like woodcut, plus, minus, screen print, whole, not whole. Lithography, dot, not dot. It's wet, it's greasy. It's like distillable down to that. And the gray areas come into like the art part. And so, I'm always talking about the magic in printmaking is the art, not the technical. Like there's no magic in the technical. That's physics and chemistry. It's what it is. It's figure outable. You don't know how to do it, call the manufacturer or call a scientist. The hard part for trying to help young people break into the field is that, something I was told a long time ago was there are no jobs, but for the good ones, there are jobs. There'll always be jobs.
Oh, interesting.
And then you're just setting up a young person for like, am I one of the good ones? Like, and you're like, oh God, you create all these psychoses for kids. But I mean, because the main thing is there's so little money in our field that it's really hard to hire people for any length of time, right? It's like my challenge right now is bringing in enough work and enough money to, maintain being able to keep Lindsay on,
right?
Because she's great. She's great to work with. It's something she wants to do. She's helping me do what I want to do. It's a good situation, but I have to keep enough money coming in order to afford to pay her, right? And so that's what I think. What's so hard for a lot of young people coming in is that the costs of employees is so high because we need to be able to pay them a living wage. Like they have to be able to eat and they have to be able to afford a place to live. That until the prints can sell for more, until contract work we can charge more, it gets harder and harder for us to bring someone in and pay them appropriately. Right? Because I don't know one printer that wants to lowball their employees as far as pay. No one wants that. We've all been in that spot.
Sure.
And no one wants to be like, negotiate to the bottom. But at the end of the day, it's like, if the profit margins are so tight, and that profit is what floats you through the times when nothing's selling, right? Because people think, oh, it's profit. It's like in a print world, it's not profit like Apple profit or something like that. What it is safety net, right? That's what floats you when the economy drops and you can still afford to make stuff, right? Is that. So what you're constantly trying to do is maintain your safety net. That's your profit margin, is your safety net in this field. And to make sure you can still afford to pay the people that you have and to keep all that going. The bigger, older print shops have old inventory that's extraordinarily valuable, and that's how they all get themselves through the lean times. Now, pull out that old Jasper Johnson and sell it, because that's going to pay all your staff for the next 3 months. And so I think it's the hard reality, that people don't think about. One of the things I use Gemini as a great example of this. Those big, insane, and amazing Julie Mehretu prints that they produce. It's like 16 feet long. It's one of the last ones that Case was doing. It was 10 panels. Each panel had 5 plates. Each plate, I believe, was 40 by 60-ish plates. So now you're dealing with 50 40 by 60-inch plates. It was a literal ton of copper used. So the material just for the plates is tens of thousands of dollars. It takes 5 people 2.5 years to do the addition. So they have to pay the overhead of the space, all the material costs, and all of the staffing costs for 2.5 years before they can actually recover that money. So Gemini has to float that for 2.5 years. That's why it's a $250,000 print.
Yeah.
It's not like people are like, oh, they're rolling in it. I'm like, not really, because they had to float a couple $1 million before they could get final payment on any of that stuff. Right. And so the faith that they have to have in their staff to fulfill it, the artists to fully realize their vision, because it's not just about making it work. When you're doing that, you got to make something amazing. Right. Like, so the pressure there. And then they have to have the faith that their money they're spending on all that time is going to pay off.
Sure.
Right. So it's a huge outlay of faith. So when you get to that level of the food chain of the art world, it's expensive. And for print shops to operate, it's really expensive. And so it's the things that people don't think about. It's the costs of operation all the time, because it's really, really high. As publishers and printers, we want to be able to pay people well. Like, I don't want to undercut and constantly have to change staff all the time because I'm lowballing pay. I want to be able to pay as much as I possibly can in order to keep good people.
Sure.
Right. And so that's why I'm like, for the good ones, there are jobs.
Oh, that's good.
I believe that was said to me, well over, like, probably almost 30 years ago at this point. And it's really held true over the years, because you get a good one, you will do whatever it takes to figure out how to maintain them, because of what everybody brings to the table, right? So every person in a print shop has a really specific role and opinion and set of eyes and perspective that they bring to the table. And when you can get a really good mix of opinions and perspectives, you get really interesting things. I feel like one of the things that's lacking that I would like to see more of is curators being able to visit during production. Because, one of the reasons I wrote Prints and Their Makers the way I did was a conversation I had with Star Figuera at MoMA. I was like, I'm looking at writing this book in these different ways. And I was like, what would be the thing that would help a curator out? Because I was thinking about the audiences. And she was like, it is so hard for us to get any of the information that happens when it's being made. And she's like, because you printers never save anything. And we're like, well, yeah, that's true. Because we're just working, it's like, you guys don't take pictures. She's like, so we have to try to reverse engineer all this stuff that's so crazy, because you guys are doing stuff that no one's done before. And so it's not like you can just look at a print and figure it out, because we're kind of crazy people when it comes to printing. And so she's like, anything that could help in that regard. So I really tried to, in that aspect, put it press side. But what it really highlighted for me was, we as an industry need to try to find ways to get curators involved, or at least fly on the wall in more of our collaborations, because there's a perspective there that we are missing, right? So when you're talking about art and print, lamenting that, like, imagine art and print if it had a correspondent that just goes to print shops and witnesses prints being made and writes about them. Crazy amazing. Not only would it be good for the field and history and having that level of criticism and a scholarly eye towards things, it would also do a lot of the education lifting for our clients. Right. So maybe I'm giving you a new job.
I know that sounds like a great new series.
So, because I'm always thinking about, like, how do I build into a budget? So when I'm looking at doing these kind of nonprofit, for-profit collaboration projects, for me, an aspect of it will always be a publication. So pairing a curator with a project to write essays so that there's a book, a physical thing that shows the process of how this came to being, talks about the artist and their perspective, but then has a critical outside perspective set of eyes that bore witness to the process. So it's not just looking at whatever materials we can scrape together for you. And you've been having to ask us all kinds of questions. It's like, no, you were there. Right. And I think we're missing that component that would really help. I think it would help a great deal. Maybe that becomes like a video component too. That's pairs with it or something. There's ways. So this is the shout out to young people. We old people need your help with that part because we know this is important, but we're not any good at it. I'm not a video person. Like video editing is not my thing. So it's I live in the 19th century technology world. I'm a printmaker, so maybe we get into the 20th century. So when we think about where the field is going and what we need, that's a big part of what I feel we need is those other eyes to really tell a different part of the story. Because, I always talk about our job ends when the collector or the audience's job begins, right? So we do all this stuff with the artists and the publisher. We do all this stuff to get it to the final thing. That's an object for people to look at and buy and all that kind of stuff. That's when their job starts. And we need to help them do their job. I feel like it's so much work just to get it to that transition point that asking us to do even more on the other end. So I'm more of the mind of saying, why don't we take the people who are already really good at looking at and explaining and educating and put them in that spot as the in-between to help, right? Because you can't do it all. You can't be good at all of it if you try to do it all. So I see that as a place for publishing and even a place for young people, right? Because a lot of people get involved in this. And I've had this happen a lot over the years where someone's like, I really want to do collaborative printmaking. And they get in and they're like a year and a half, 2 years in. And they're like, Jesus, this is a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
This is insane. And like, what you do is insane. And I was like, yeah, it is. There's nothing insane about what it is that we do.
Surprise.
But yeah, because a lot of people are like, and you get no credit for it. I was like, if you want credit, you go on the art side. Like, be the artist. Like, that's where credit is. It's like, because that's just not our job. It's just not, like, that's not why you get into it, right? Your job is to help bring something into being that wouldn't exist without you, but you would have never done on your own. And that's just understanding your role. And I think that's a hard part for society, like American society in particular, is that, everybody gets fed the art star thing, that everybody's supposed to be the center of the universe and all that. But the reality of the way things work is that in the food pyramid of the art world is the top where the artists are, the top tier artists, is very few people. And the base is everybody that makes all that happen and makes all that possible. So there's so many more jobs and so much more to do down here. Right. And so, and it's not like none of that's important or it's not fulfilling. When I do career development for artists, I'm like, if you're not willing to jump through these hoops to do these things, you are not going to be at that part of the pyramid. It's like, what are you willing to do? What's going to make you happy? That's how you find your spot.
Right.
And you just got to be honest with yourself.
Right.
Like, where do I want to be in the food chain of the art world? Where am I going to be comfortable? What things do I want in my life personally, separate from work? Like, do you want a family? Do you want kids? Do you want to live in a great place? Or do you want access to things? Right? So it's like, I live in Asheville, North Carolina, because I can raise a family here. I can afford to raise a family here. I can raise them in a slower way. My kids garden, they're dirty. They play in the woods. It's amazing. It's a great way to be a kid, playing in creeks and picking bugs and learning about birds and the seasons and how the sun changes position when it sets over the year and stuff. And
don't come home until it's dark.
It's kind of what it is, and it's like that life where you're just like, kids have a concept of summer feet, and versus like you grow up in, say, New York City. It's a wildly different experience, right? Dirt's a totally different thing. Yeah. Dirt's not something you touch. So,
never thought of that. That's true.
So when you think about it, so that's a quality of life choice for me. That's why I'm not still in New York City. But it doesn't mean my work isn't still in New York City, right? So young people, I'm always encouraging. I'm like, you're going to have to move around. You're going to have to learn a lot from different people in a lot of these bigger places and learn as much as you can before these people retire. because there's a lot of great printers out there who are, don't necessarily have that many years left of wanting to do the grind or even physically being capable of it. And learn as much as you can, because I learned from a lot of different people, lots and lots and lots of printmakers. And that's what's helped me over the years have different perspectives, is learning from lots of different people in different parts of the country, different age, generational experiences and stuff. And, I feel really fortunate in that regard. I feel like I got a lot of brain dumps of people getting ready to retire. They're like, well, you're the last one, kid. I'll tell you, because you just happen to be there when they're on their way out. So, if you see some people who might be on their way out, now's a good time to go maybe talk to them and learn something from them, because every printer out there has invented processes, has really interesting ways of doing things that may die with them unless someone goes and learns it. And it's because we all have to do all these crazy things all the time. Artists show up and have these harebrained ideas, right? So you're constantly developing new things, but people may not know you did it or know how you did it. And so there's so much to be gained and learned in that regard. And, it's, I don't want to, be a downer on this. I don't see it as a bad thing, but, we are getting ready to experience a massive brain loss of our older printers. And, it started, and it's going to accelerate essentially. And so now's the time. Like, you're young, you're flexible, don't mind sleeping on couches or something. Like, take your tours, go talk to some people, try to set it up, or Zoom communication, we can do it, via digital media now too. Reach out and learn. And it's just, there's no substitute for time on the press.
Yeah, sure.
That's just what it is. It's like people say, well, how do you get good at something? I was like, time on the press.
Do it, yeah.
You got to be on the press working. And it may take more time than you want. Printmaking is frustrating in a lot of ways, in the sense that it takes a while to get good at stuff, but it's just like anything, it just takes time. So once you develop your comfort with your processes, don't feel you have to do them all. Most printers still are process-specific printers. People like myself, the super crazy ones that do them all, is not normal. That's kind of nuts. That's another level of my affliction. I'm just like, well, why don't we just do it all? It's like, it'd be so much easier if I just did one process. But at the same time, that limits what you can provide an artist, right? So, and I have a hard time with limiting my artists. I have a hard time saying no. So I definitely need to work on that part. Do you have any questions or observations?
Yeah, my observation, which is one you've heard me say about you before, we all think that other people know what we know and think like we do, but I think you're really unusual. Because
I don't know how I should take that.
Well, because you come at it, the creation of art, from your brain can come at it from so many different perspectives. Like you can pull on the history, you can write about art eloquently, you can think through the conceptual rigor of a thing, in ways that a lot of people don't. And I see it when you're giving tours at the print fair. Like you give a perspective for people who don't know anything about prints, a kind of a background picture that I never would have thought to give them. And I really appreciate that about you. And I think at one point you told me that you had taken a group through the Joan Mitchell show at the BMA, and you were pointing out to the people you were with that this canvas was upside down because she painted left-handed or right-handed, I can't remember. And, and those are ways, or you just were talking earlier about knowing that the mark was hesitant. I never look at work that way. Ever. Like it's not a framework with which I approach art. And I think it's a really useful one. And I wish I knew better how to do it. So I really appreciate that about you.
You just need to be press side more often.
There you go.
Because that's where you learn it. For me, how I learned it, in order to be a skillful collaborator, someone who can actually help the artist I'm working with solving their creative problems, I have to understand the making of art in a much more broad spectrum versus just my own, right? And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of experience, a lot of watching, and a lot of asking of questions. to understand why someone wants to do something or why they did this versus that. And watching their body language, because so much can be learned about mark making by watching the body language. So one of the things from that Joan Mitchell show, I was like, look in this room, which paintings do you think are the most successful? And they'd be like, this one, this one, this one. I said, what's the thing that they all have in common? And they don't look like they have anything in common. Like, it's not color, it's not scale. And I was like, used a minimum of 3 different size brushes. I was like, she was amazing when she had at least 3 brushes that she used. When she used 2 different sizes, painting didn't work. And it's because you can see
Exhibit A.
Well, but that's because that's like my job. So like when I see an artist struggling, I have to figure out what's the thing that they're pushing up against. And so for Joan Mitchell, it was really clear in the way she painted that she had a greater sense of freedom when she had a wider diversity of marks that were able to be made based on the tool. And every artist out there knows it's super easy to try to make the thing in your hand do it all, right? Make that number 2 pencil feel like a black Prismacolor pencil or a 4-inch wide crayon, right? Because you're like, oh, it's in my hand, I can make it do it, because you know you can make things happen, right? But you have to put it down and pick it up. And every time you put something down, pick up a new thing, it changes your perspective, because it changes the weight, changes the distance you are now from whatever you're working on, changes the scale of the mark, it changes, from drawing from your fingertips or your wrist, your elbow, your shoulder, or your hip, right? And so when Joan Mitchell would use 3 brushes, she made great paintings. And you could see it. It's all the paintings, everybody goes, I love this one. Like everyone unanimously, like, I love that one. 3 brushes. 50-50s over here and some other ones, 2 brushes. So from a person like myself, whose job it is to watch someone, and when they hit that wall, to try to figure out why they hit the wall, like, it's just years of watching a lot of different artists work and trying to, you're proofing, you're like, why won't this layer work? Doesn't matter what color, doesn't matter how heavy, doesn't matter where I bury it. Why won't this layer work? And then you start to learn, like, oh, for this artist, they need this type of tension to set up the main thing, or they need everything in harmony, or they only need 1 discordant thing, not 2 or 3. Or you start to learn them. And so you start to, the more you look at stuff from how it's made, the more you understand why it's made, right? Because everything for an artist is a struggle of how to get it out of your head, how to get it out of your experience, your bones or your soul or whatever you want to call it, into something physical, out your hands, right? And it's whenever there's a block, it's because something from here to here is not working. It's usually the thing that's in your hand. And so, like, when you watch an artist draw, you can tell when they're searching, because there's a certain body language, body posture. You can tell when they found, and then you can tell when they realize something is off. Like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. You can just watch the movements of the head, the way the tension in the shoulder is, like, all that just reads right away. So your skill as a collaborating printer is to get into your artist's creative space as quickly as possible so you can help them solve their problems. That's your job. It's not any of these other things like how to print a lithograph or how to wipe an etching plate. Your real skill is how to help them get comfort with their instrument or the material or the process as quickly as possible, so that you can learn from them what they need and what's not working as quickly as possible. Because that's how you can take someone you've never worked with before and in 5 days come up with a couple of prints. Right. But that's not going to happen your first time. Right. And you don't always get it right. Like, I still get shit wrong.
Well, sure.
You get it wrong. But it's just ink on paper.
Right.
You can just reproof it. You can just make another plate. You can just do it again. It's not like a painting where everything has to work by the end because it's a cumulative process. It's like, nope, we just get more paper. We just start proofing over. Right. So I think that's one of the joys of print, is that you get a do-over, like as many as you want. And that's why prints are so special, is because they're so considered. And I think the people who really look at prints and love prints are like, they understand that consideration that's gone into that. Some artists will work on a print for like 2, 3, 4 years because they're like, this little thing is off and I don't know why. And they'll noodle on this thing for years until it's just right, because you can. It's not like the painting you got to be, it's either you're going to burn it or you're going to let it out in the world. It's just how it goes. But the print, you're like, oh, I can make this work. So as a publisher, are always like, no, we need to finish it. We need to finish it. We're going bankrupt. So that's a nice part about having those different perspectives of the artist and the printer and the publisher too in that environment, is that everybody has different desires. Everybody wants the best work possible as quickly as possible, but they come at it from different directions. So some of my perspective is that, having been an artist who's been published and worked with printers, having been a collaborating printer and being a publisher and / contract printer, you wear all the hats. And so you get less annoyed with your contract printing jobs when you're a publisher yourself. Right? If you're only a contract printer, it's real easy to start getting annoyed with, like, why won't they just do one more color or pay for, like, it's $1,000. Why won't they just pay for it? And you're just like, well, because that's their bottom line and they're doing their math. And when you're a publisher and you go, okay, well, that's going to be an extra $1,000 to do this. It's like, how important is it? Right? Is there another way? And then the printer goes, it's always important. And then the artist is always like, don't ever second guess my genius.
Ooh, yeah, right.
You know? So when you start thinking about it, it helps to have experience in all three of the hats, because it makes you more patient and it makes you more understanding, and it gives you a different level of flexibility that you might not have otherwise. So that's why when I used to teach, do some college teaching, I always had students print for each other, at least on one project. And it's because that's the only time when you can't have happy accidents. Someone did something, you had to make it work. Right. And that experience alone teaches them the value of doing things well, doing things right, and following it through until you get it. And now, whether or not they ever want to do it again doesn't really matter. But now they're going to be really good at whatever that thing was. It was an etching project or a litho project. They've gotten much better at doing something, which translates to doing whatever else they decide to do with their lives. Right. So that one time where someone made a mark and you can't just screw it up and accept it. Well, now it's just all black over there. You can't just Rembrandt paint it out. It's like, it had to be what they gave you. And I think it's that doing that one time fundamentally changes people's perspective.
All right. I'm going to suggest that to True for his class.
They may revolt. I'm not saying it was easy. And the other thing I used to do too, which is because I come from that apprenticeship model, which I still think is super important. I wish we had it in more industries and more fields, because it's really important to learn through doing. And it's really important that the projects you're learning on actually matter, because they're going into the world, they're going into the marketplace or wherever it's to a museum show. So it matters that you do it well. When I was teaching in Talia, I would make 3 different etching plates at the beginning of the semester that incorporated the techniques that were going to be taught throughout the semester. One was super representational, one was super abstract, and one was kind of quasi in between, like gestural and whatnot. And I told each student that in order to pass the class, you had to pick one plate and match my proof. Just pull one impression that matched mine. So I'd pin mine up, have the 3 plates out, and they had the whole semester to just take a plate at any point and print until they matched it.
Wow.
And every student that did it early was happier with the work they made throughout the entire class, because they learned how to print.
Gotcha. Fascinating.
So, because they had to learn how to pay attention to what was in a plate and what transferred out of a plate.
Right.
They had to learn. So then, you're teaching them techniques and skills and all that stuff as you're going. And so the ones who waited to the end, this is the most common thing I would hear, is like, I wish I'd have printed that sooner.
Right.
Because they're like, oh, when I had these struggles, would have made this print that I was trying to make better. And that's because we're missing practical education, like that apprenticeship style education on so many levels throughout, our society. But, and it also comes down to looking at art, like all the different hats. There's the artist hat, the printer hat, and the publisher hat. Like, we're all missing the ability to teach people. So, I learned these things because I ended up in environments where they needed extra hands to do something. And I'm like, if I don't do this, I'm probably not going to have a job. So I learned it on the job. Right. And people are always like, well, how did you learn that? I was like, well, I wanted to keep my job, so I learned how to do that. So it's like I wanted to eat. maybe that's the poor kid from the South mentality, you know. One of the things that kind of always bugs me about, you know, is like you got to be willing to fail and like all those kinds of attitudes towards failure when you're working on something. That's a really privileged perspective. So if you come from a background where failing means destitution, failure is not an option. And so what it means is everything is educational. If this didn't work, you're going to change course, right? So it's not that something failed in the semantic sense of what that means, right? Because that is definitely socioeconomic as a factor. That's not often considered. And when you see all the people who say that, there's generally extraordinarily wealthy people. Like, gotta be willing to fail. It's like, because they can. Like, they don't have to make it work. Whereas down the line, you have to make it work. Failure is not an option. And I think when you have a failure is not an option approach, then you're open to learning. It's not that you're going to try to drive that square peg in a round hole. You're going to be like, I have a square peg in a round hole. I'm going to whittle that thing down to a round dowel rod, get it in that damn hole. I'm going to figure out a way. When you start to see that through artists and throughout the art world, it's like, how malleable are you to get to where you need to go? How willing to learn are you to get to where you need to go? And how willing are you to give up? Mm-hmm. Because I see something not working and failure as two really different things.
Right. Yeah, not.
And I know it's a semantics thing.
Yeah.
But
well, it's a mindset.
It's a mindset.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, you know, when I've got a project I'm working on with an artist, if we abandon an image that we're working on, I don't consider that a failure. I will walk that artist through that print, being like, these are the things that worked. These are the things that you liked. These are the things that didn't work. These are the things you don't like. So when we set up this next go at it from a different direction, we're going to cut this stuff out and we're going to get to here. So I'm really glad we just made this because we just learned something.
Right, of course.
Right. And so it's never a giving up on the goal. It's just an educational. So people may parse it out as being like, oh, that's failure. I was like, no, we never gave up on it. Right. That's a really different thing in my book. And I think, you know, for a lot of young people, the semantics of the TED Talk world don't sync up with the reality of their lives and their experiences and the financial difficulties and all the other hardships. And you always got to consider the perspective of the person who's given that. And, you know, so for me, what I try to really help young people do is understand what transferable skills they're learning. Right. So if you learn how to be a good collaborative printer, that means you're a good collaborator in any working environment. Right. So even if you end up switching industries or careers past the transferable skills. So there's tons and tons and tons of transferable skills when it comes from the arts to everything else. You kind of have to look at it like that too. It's not just, you know, we learn how to do an engraving. You know, it's like you're actually learning how to look at the world and distill it down to its most essential elements. Like that's what you just did.
Right.
And that is super important. And that's why people gravitate towards prints and printmakers and the printmaking world, is because there's a lot of really important human survival skills that are going on there that are easier to find. It's not behind the curtain, so to speak. It's all out there. As you say, you know, we're the nicest people in the art world. So, you know, I love that you say that, because it's so true, especially when we're doing the art fair stuff. It's like there's this tension that you can see when people gather for a tour. The people who've never been there before are, you know what I mean? It's like a totally new environment, or they've been to other art fairs and they've been basically shunned because they're not dripping diamonds and dollars, you know? One of the first things that comes out of your mouth is like, these are nice people and this is a really fun environment. Like, you know, and then I always, you know, reiterate that like 50 times throughout the tours and stuff, but it's so true. It's like, you know, this is a place where people are welcome. So the print world has always been about accessibility. It's always been about sharing in that way and that kind of openness. And so, you know, for the young people who are interested in being involved in this field for the long haul, I always ask the first question of, do you need to be the printer? Or would you be an amazing dealer? Would you be a good publisher? Would you be a great writer? We need a lot of things in this industry. Yeah. Like, you know, we don't necessarily need 1,000 more printers. But we need 1,000 more people who are enthusiastic about print in the industry, right? And so you may find that you need to keep different hours than like collaborating printer hours. Like, just so people understand. So like when Jason came to town, 5 days. So it's 9:30 in the morning till 5. We generally don't take a lunch, work through, kind of eat on the fly. I take a break because I have young children. So I go home to do dinner, bed, bath time routines. Got to keep structure in the house. And then I'm back from 9 to 1 a.m.
Oh, gosh.
9 p.m. to 1 a.m. That's 5 days straight. Maybe 2 a.m. Because you got to get it done. You have a finite period of time.
Is the evening till 2 in the morning with the artist, or is it just
sometimes
you trying to pull things together?
It's both.
Okay.
It kind of depends on where you're at in the process, because it's the eternal hurry up and wait game. It's like we all stand around and wait for the artist to give us something, then they have to wait. And so I try to keep the artist creatively engaged. Generally, I work on more than one thing at the time, or have them work on monotypes and things like that in the downtime. So you can keep it all going and keep them creatively engaged. The last thing you want is people checking their email too much or listening to the news and getting all pissed off. There's this one period of time. I mean, some of our more recent years in politics, I've literally banned news and notifications because it was just like, everything we go and find, get a thing from the New York Times on your phone, and it's like, just like no one can focus. Everyone's angry. And you're just like, all right. Develop like the swear jar. The environments are really specific, and you got to keep everything going. So the more you can keep your artists creatively engaged. So some artists want to work early, so they get in super early. And other artists, you just talk about what you need to have ready for them when they come in the morning, when some of them want to hang out all night. It just kind of depends on their situations. And some of them are like, it's going to art camp when they get to come make prints. I mean, coming to Asheville is a real hardship for people, I tell you. It's like unbelievably beautiful place. Where the studio is right in the middle of downtown, and the artists usually stay upstairs in the apartment upstairs. And so it's in this like quiet little back alley in the middle of downtown. So they don't need anything. It's all available right there, and you're just kind of this idyllic setting. And you just come downstairs and have a couple people who are willing to help you do your crazy thing. It's about when you talk about the romance or the magic, it's that environment is really a big part of it. And I think, we owe a great deal to people like Bob Blackburn for really pioneering that environment. And it was his time at the Harlem Community Arts Center, which was, Augusta Savage. She's the one who really created that kind of concept that Bob set up the printmaking workshop with, and so many other people. Hers was about age diversity, ethnic and racial diversity, skill diversity. You put all these people together and you teach them stuff. So like one of my favorite examples of that is in the same litho class that Reva Helfand was teaching in the 30s. Bob Blackburn I believe he was 13. Ronald Joseph was 23, and Ernest Critchlow was 33. And they were all in the beginning litho class together. And these ages of mastery and coming mastery. It's just amazing. And that's how, in an idyllic world, that's how it would work. So people have tried, anything you can do to kind of create that environment where it's okay to learn at any age. I think that's what's so great about a print shop for a lot of artists too. It's like the only time they get to be in school again, or learn something, and then around crazy people. So it makes it fun. I don't know how best to advise young people other than, if you can do something else, do it. And if you can't, then this is for you.
Okay, right. That's great.
Because otherwise you'll spend a lot of time doing this thing and then switch.
Yeah.
Plenty for you to cut out.
Yeah, that's right.
So.
Do you, I know that you have a little speaking point in your brain about the importance of art and why it's critical to humanity.
For me, the arts are fundamental, not just to human evolution and the development of societies and communities, but it's one of the roots of what has allowed our species to survive, period, which is the primary thing that's allowed us to survive is our adaptability. Humans don't have a lot of means to protect ourselves. We don't have big claws and giant teeth and heavy armor on our bodies. We have to use our brains in order to find food, water, and shelter. So as things change in our environment, it's our ability to adapt to those changes that's allowed us to survive. And for me, the arts really help fuel one of the most important elements of adaptability, which is creativity. It's curiosity, right? So it's paying attention to things and being able to store those random little bits and pieces of information for future use, because we don't know if we're going to need to make a big change. And so the arts allow us to see the world through someone else's eyes. If you think about the earliest, and what a lot of anthropologists will call the first truly human invention, was storytelling. It allows us to learn and experience without having to go through it ourselves. We can learn it from someone else. And someone can tell us a story about what they experienced, and now we have essentially had that experience and we can learn from that. So it's our ability to pass knowledge on, and it's our ability to be curious, and that level of curiosity that engenders creativity. That's what's made us adaptable. And so the arts are critical in maintaining and developing curiosity and creativity, which is to maintain our adaptability as a species. It's also what allows us to empathize. One of the key roots of empathy, seeing the world through someone else's eyes, being able to put ourselves in that person's position. So when you look at a work of art, all of those things are happening for you. You're getting curious. You want to see more of it. You want to investigate it. It's instilling an extra sense of creativity in yourself, because you start to wonder how somebody did something. Even if it's my kid could have done that, you're still thinking about now your kid doing that, right? You're developing these other pictures in your mind. There's information to be learned and then passed on through that. You'll tell someone else about what you experienced or what you saw with a work of art, and you've seen the world through their eyes. And so for me, the arts are integral to our survival. I'll often refer to it that you don't need art per se to survive, meaning put food on your table, but it's the quality in your life. It's what keeps your life going, right? It's what creates fulfillment. It's what allows us to adapt and to grow and to connect with one another. We wouldn't have done all of what we've done as a species if we weren't curious and we weren't creative and we weren't reaching and we weren't connecting to one another in some meaningful way, even if it's nonverbal, if it's just an object that we find. So for me, I think one of the cinematic visual examples of that is the apes in 2001 that see the monolith. Right? And it's just this idea that you've seen something that you can never unsee. And it is so different from everything you've known. And in that case, it was linear, angular, and smooth in a world that had nothing straight and nothing smooth. And the idea that that could exist fundamentally changes everything. So for a person who walks up to a work of art and sees something that they have never seen before, they're now fundamentally changed as a person. And that's the value, because now their perspective has shifted, their curiosity has peaked, they're becoming more adaptable because they have more to draw on. And that's one of the main reasons art's so important. And why people love it so much is that it engenders that curiosity within them, and it makes them more creative in the rest of their lives. So yeah, art's pretty fundamental.
Well done.
So, monkeys around the pond. That's to me is the genius of that particular moment in that film. That's like the entire film is about that. Is about an experience that fundamentally changes.
Okay.
You can't undo.
Yeah.
You can't unsee something.
Right.
And that's us. We're not goldfish.
Right. Genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah, you can't put it back. And so, you're probably experiencing some of that doing this podcast. It's like, you're talking to such a wide swath of people from a lot of different perspectives that you can't help but be changed by that. And then it starts to have little effects that ripple throughout your day-to-day life, which changes the way you do the rest of your work with the fair and as a writer, and the way you see things starts to change. Right. So the more we're out looking and doing, the better we get at things.
Yeah.
Bigger contribution you can make.
I've very much enjoyed talking to all of the people that have come on so far. It's provided a very easy way to reach out to somebody that you probably never would have come across in your career as a curator at a museum, and just said, let's have an hour conversation or whatever. So it's been opening and freeing, and I don't know, it's like I'm sitting in a more generous art space than I was at the museum.
Yeah, and it's necessarily different roles.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the museum has certain structures in place that are good and some that are just there, for better or for worse. And it's serving a specific defined role. And what you're doing now, in my mind, is serving not just the field itself, or the field of printmaking, but really trying to help engender a larger sense of creativity and who gets to be exposed and who's allowed to be exposed to the work, right? Because museums can sometimes be really standoffish, and what you're doing is saying no, that wall doesn't need to exist, and you're saying welcome, right? So I think a lot of the work you're doing is to reduce those barriers to entrance into the arts, and I think if institutions did more of that, they'd have greater community support and they'd be more effective to their communities. So what you're essentially doing is providing a critical role and service to a very large community that doesn't have the time or necessarily the expertise to do it, but we need it done. So I see what you're doing as being really critical to our field and printmaking and the arts, because you don't have to like printmaking to like Platemark. You quote me on it.
Okay.
So, it's you just have to have a certain level of curiosity and willingness to participate. And that's really what it is. And I think you're helping lower the threshold to the feeling of being able to participate, which is really important. I think that's what you're doing with the fair too.
Right.
I think that's a really important part of an art fair, is to help people feel that they have the right to be there.
Right. Yeah. Feel strongly about that one.
Yeah, of course you do. I mean, that's why it's always fun to do. Like when you were managing it, when it was at the museum, like myself and many others would always comment, be like, this is the only fair we feel treated like people.
Oh.
It's like snacks and like just nice things, like just like, something normal versus like, standoffish. And it's like, oh yeah, we got to spend $6 in the bottle of water too. We can't leave our booze and there's no water fountain. And you just like, ugh, you just like, you're not treated like a person. And then it extends out to how people then start treating others, because that dehumanizing like comes down the chain.
Sure.
And what you've done with the fair for me is, it's something for a lot of other fairs to learn from, which is, the client or the buyer, the collector, the patron experience is definitely affected by the experience of the dealers, the galleries, the publishers, people who are there showing stuff, and if we've got to fight everything just to be able to have like a booth that's functional or whatnot, then that frustration carries through and affects the entire chain, and it makes people not want to participate in the arts from the collector or patron's perspective. So it's super important. And I think a lot of art fairs take that for granted. They're just like, what are you going to do without us? Versus being like, well, maybe that might be true, but we can still be a good person.
Right.
So, which is what you guys have done. I mean, that's fair. It's fun to be at. I always learn something. It's great. I always see stuff, and, I get excited when I look at who's coming. Because I'm like, oh, I hope so-and-so brings this, because I want to see it in person. Sometimes I'll even send a little emails ahead of time, like, hey, are you going to bring this? Because I want to see that. Because I want to see it, because I like, because I get to learn. I still want to see stuff. I do this all day, but it doesn't mean I don't need to see what I do all day. I want to see what other people do all day.
Right. I will put in a little plug for folks. It's not sustainable with 18 vendors. Like I need more people. We didn't make any money last year or this year. And, the three of us can't keep going if we don't make any money doing it. So I'm putting out my call for people to get in touch about coming and vending.
Yeah. I mean, I always, when I'm doing the tours, I always make the plug. I'm like, this isn't an exhibition at a museum. This is people's livelihood. If you like what you've seen and you want it to exist in the world, you gotta pony up the way you can. If you can buy, because that keeps that person's shop open. That keeps that artist making work. It keeps this fair happening. If you can't buy, start taking pictures and posting on social media, get other people to buy.
Yeah.
Send it to someone who that can. And so there's always a way to participate. There's always a way to support, no matter where you're at on the socioeconomic ladder. It's like, I'm not in there buying. I'm not in the buying place. I'm in the making place, right? All my extra resources go to my babies and keeping my studio going. I wish I was in the buying place. So often I see stuff that I wish I could buy, but so then I send an email out, or I put an Instagram post or something about it, because that's what I can do in that moment. Right. So there's always a way. So you're making the appeal to print dealers, print publishers, galleries who have artists who make a lot of prints. This is another venue for you to be out there, and you'll be treated well.
That's
He'd
true.
be treated like a person.
That's true.
And that's what makes it work. So, the original concept of an art fair was for all of the dealers to share their mailing lists. Right. That was the purpose. Like when you think like the early ones, like the early Armory show, which was in the Gramercy Hotel, Paul Morris did that because he was like, he and a bunch of other dealers at the time were like, we only have the people we have, and we're going to eventually run out of stuff those people are willing to buy. We got to find a way to get out to more people. And, this is way before the internet. And so they're like, well, if we all come together and we all invite our people, then we can share our people. Right. And it worked.
Right.
Right. So that's kind of the point, so the more vendors that come, the more you share those contacts, the more likely everyone is to do well.
Yeah.
All boats rise.
All right. Thanks, cheerleader.
Hey,
appreciate it.
we all need it. Our world's too good and too important to let things.
Yeah.
So.
It's a great place to be. All right. Well, Phil, we should probably wrap it up. I thank you so much for dispensing wisdom as you always do. And I know that our young question sender will appreciate every word.
Hopefully it answers some questions versus freaks people out.
Yeah.
So, just to really reiterate, I do see the industry going in a good direction. I'm not going to predict all the bumps and bruises along the way, or even where it's going to end up. But the trajectory that it's having, and given that printmaking is always an additive toolbox, we just put stuff in, we have more history and more time to pull from, it will work out fine. But it is definitely going to need to be more collaborative, as is everything in the world. That's where we're going. We all need to work together more often and share that burden of labor, but then also share in the benefits. Right? So I think if we push our field in that direction, we're going to be doing good.
Right. Agree.
So.
Okay.
And thank you for doing your part in that, because this is one of those ways.
I know. Working at it.
We appreciate it from this end. So if you don't hear it all the time, I'm telling you now. Doing a good thing.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks for doing it.
As are you. All right. So thank you once again. I so appreciate you being here.
Likewise. And until the next time.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this episode with Phil Sanders. I hope you enjoyed it. He's always full of pearls of wisdom, and I love watching him think. He has an amazing brain. Thank you to him for being a great guest, and a thank you to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music, and another thank you to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for helping me with sound. Images we talk about are over in the show notes. You know that, over at platemarkpodcast.com. And also another call to action, leave us a review. You can do it within the platemarkpodcast.com website, or you can go and do it on Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this. I think that's probably it. Yeah, that's it. We'll see you next time.